Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Hattie, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. When I mention the word learning, what does that mean to you? There are many ways that we can learn. We can learn through reading, we can learn through writing, we can learn by watching. And there are many different learning modalities that we can use as educators to help impart knowledge and information to our students. I'm really excited with that in mind to have Professor John Hattie joining us. Professor Hattie is going to be talking about his latest article, Learning Styles, Preferences, or Strategies. And we're really going to spend some time diving into what each of those things mean and which of those is grounded in best practice research. Meaning, which of those concepts, learning styles, preferences, or strategies, has been shown in the research to be effective when it comes to helping students acquire and retain information. Many of you might know Professor Hattie from his work on visible learning and his research on meta-analyses of different concepts and strategies and things that we do in education and whether or not they're as effective as we think they are. So Professor Hattie, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
It's great to be here, John. And like you, my name's John too, please.
Okay, will do. In terms of my intro, I was talking about learning styles, preferences, or strategies. Before we even get into what the difference between those things or among those things are, let's talk a little bit. How did you become interested in research behind the different things we do as educators?
I think we know a tremendous amount. We have an incredibly strong evidence base as to what works best within education. We're at the point where it is the case that we have an evidence base. Now is the time to implement that evidence, looking at all the different things that we do in schools to children, to learners. I think it's a pretty well-known notions of what we should do and what we shouldn't do. It's not a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of an autonomy to do as we want. There is a systematic way of doing it. The hard part, John, is the implementing of it. And that's what we need to focus on very much. How do we do it with fidelity and with quality? And the topic of today, our learning styles, is one that has been discussed so many times over the last many years and so dismissed over the last many years, but it keeps popping up.
Let's talk a little bit about that. So when we're talking about learning styles, preferences, and strategies, learning strategies, can you walk us through what the similarities are among those things and what are the differences?
Let me start, John, by asking you a question. You ask the audience, I'm going to ask you. How do you learn?
I learn through a multitude of ways. I'll be honest, John, I enjoy watching movies. I enjoy listening to podcasts when I'm working out. I would say that I find those ways quicker and easier for me to acquire knowledge, but obviously as an educator, I read a lot as well. But if you asked me where I would go to first, it would probably be watching and listening.
So, in the language of learning styles, you're a visual learner, John?
I do learn visually, but
before you get to the but, the learning styles research says there are a few major styles that people use. If I was listening to you then, and I was being a little naughty here, but if I was being a typical learning styles person, I'd say what you need most of all, John, is teaching that uses visual stimuli. Now, you keep going to the but, and the but is the critical part. The but says a couple of things. The first thing it says, if it doesn't work visually, you've got other strategies. But that's not what the learning styles literature people say. They say, no, we've got to match how you prefer, what your style is, with how we should teach. And that matching hypothesis is the core notion of the learning styles literature. Preferences is very similar in a way that I prefer to do it this way, but I've got other ways of doing it. The one that I want to advance is the learning strategies. You talked and I cut you off so you didn't get there. What strategies do you actually use? You've told me how you prefer to learn, what style you use, and I'm being naughty. I'm narrowing it down and saying you're a visual learner, and yes, there's a but what strategy do you use? Do you write notes? Do you reread? Do you use mnemonics? What strategies do you use, John?
I use several different strategies. If I'm reading something, particularly if I'm reading something for a business purpose, right? If I'm reading something for pleasure, I'm not annotating the text. But if I am reading it for my work in education, I will use different color highlighters to highlight different things within the text. So maybe the central theme is blue and the main points are pink. I also, for myself, and I coach folks around using what we call here, and I'm sure you know of this, Cornell notes, where again, it's a very systemic way
Yes.
of taking notes and writing those notes and then summarizing what you read.
But that's a really good example of the learning strategies. And I hear you talking about at least two there. One is about highlighting and the text colors. Believe it or not, the effect size of that is incredibly low. But organizing Cornell notes, incredibly high. One of the things that we've been looking at is looking at 400 different learning strategies, of which we mentioned two, to work out what the optimal ones are. And going to the bottom line, we do know the optimal learning strategies. There's about 12 to 20 of these, but there's another big but. And the other big but is it depends on whether the focus is on learning the content or whether the focus is on understanding the relationships between ideas. The strategies differ. And this is why a lot of those learning strategy courses don't work, because they're not focused on aligning it with whether it's the surface or the deep of the learning. And the argument we're saying is that learning styles, learning preferences keep coming up. But if you actually talked about teaching students optimal strategies, you get a big bang for your buck. But if you then switch it to say, oh, John's a visual learner, so we have to match that with visual teaching, that has zero to negative effect. If you are, and you didn't say you were, but if you were incredibly a visual learner, then what I need to do is to teach you how to be other kinds of learners, not to keep reinforcing the one kind. And that's why many, many other people have written about the disaster of learning styles. In fact, when we were writing our article, I went to a couple of very famous editors of journals. They said, no, we don't want another article on learning styles. They did. But when I showed them what we were doing, that is the resurgence, they got very interested. And that's why we kept pursuing it, because it keeps popping up. What we need most of all is for teachers to talk about learning strategies. I bet if I said to you, John, tell me about your theory of teaching, every teacher in the world has an incredibly strong theory of teaching, and I think that's wonderful. But what's your theory of learning? Often it's silence, and then I might ask, well, tell me about different learning theories you know. And that's a poverty. Often people will say Piaget. He wrote his major book 100 years ago this year. There's been many, many since. And there's nothing wrong with Piaget. He has a lot of good stuff to tell us still. One of the things that people forget about Piaget is he had his 4 levels, the concrete operation, pre-operation. But one of the things they forget is he said, when you go to the next phase, it doesn't replace the previous stage. You keep adding on. In the same way, when you go back to learning styles, we need to teach kids about how to use and think visually, how to think kinesthetically, how to think verbally. But one of the major reasons that the resurgence has happened, and it's a design issue here, and that's correlations. They go out and they measure students' verbal, visual, kinesthetic styles. They correlate it with achievement. And surprise, surprise, verbal correlates quite high with achievement. And they say, see, learning styles work. Nonsense.
In that regard, well, first of all, you need to tell me what I need to be doing instead of highlighting, because I'm going to have to redeem myself with all the people that I've been coaching to do that. So that's number one, John. You have to help me there. But two, when we talk about, and when you mention, if someone has a preference for visual, how do we teach them kinesthetic? How do we teach them verbal learning strategies? What are the best learning strategies given the research?
That's the right question. If you said to me, the first part of your question, tell me more how to teach people to do kinesthetic and verbal, I'd say, don't waste your time. They are just medium. But what are the strategies? It turns out, as I mentioned before, that it depends when. Take the case where the student is first being exposed to something. They're reading something about the US Constitution. Best skill you can teach them is summarizing and organizing, which is Cornell notes notion. And if you do underlining and text, if that leads to note taking and organizing, yes. And I don't know about you, John, but no one taught me that till I went to university. And I had to pick it up almost by myself. 5-year-olds need to know how to do it. And the reason why organizing and summarizing is so critical is that trying to work out what the big idea is. In any class that you go to, lots of stuff is incoming. Teachers talk 90% of the day. What's the important stuff and what's the unimportant stuff? That's where note taking helps. So I want all teachers to teach 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds how to take notes and how to do it well. It's easy. Say to the students, I'm going to talk to you for the next 15 minutes about topic X. I want you to take notes. I'm going to give you some time to organize it, and I'm going to ask you to hand it in. Some students hand in blank pages. Some students, worse, hand in a verbatim script of everything that John has said, which means nothing is happening. It's a massive skill to be able to note take. The alternative, we see this so often in classrooms, the students are sitting there and within about 30 seconds to a minute, they're turning off. Too much information. They don't know what's important and unimportant. That's why note taking and summarizing is such an incredibly powerful skill. And I really ask every one of your listeners is to be devoted to teaching that, because that's the skill that matters the most when we are first exposed. Does that make sense?
It does make sense because it really forces the learner to internalize what they're reading, what they're watching, what they're physically doing, if I'm understanding that correctly.
And because of that, John, there's no point you writing the notes and giving it to them. It's because of that process you just talked about, of the student internalizing and working out what is the importance, what's the not. And that's where techniques like Cornell is very powerful to structure how to do that. And so giving the students the notes, it helps them, but trivially so, getting them to do it. And it's quite a difficult task. So it needs to be taught. I haven't finished. Now I'm going to go on. Before I can get to the deeper ideas, there is a phase of learning that I think we forget. And I think we forget we have to teach it, and that's called consolidation. I don't want you sitting there when I give you a problem and you saying, oh, 9 times 6. Oh, it's that. No, it's 50. Because all your working memory is being spent on working out what 9 times 6 is. If you've consolidated that so that you know automatically it's 54, all your memory space is going to be used on using it in the problem. So I want us to teach the strategies of consolidation. Let me mention a couple. The first fascinates me because it's the very first experiment ever done in education psychology in 1856 by Ebbinghaus. And that is it better to do spaced or mass practice? Is it better for you to do 10 problems here today, right now, or is it better to do one problem over 10 days? It's the most systematic finding, the most replicated finding, the most meta-analysis finding. Overwhelmingly, spaced beats practice every day. I challenge you to find a single book written in spaced practice ever. Find an occasion where teachers use spaced practice. It does not happen. We rush through the curriculum, we move on. There was a great study, came out a few months ago. All students, no matter what their ability, needs 5 to 7 opportunities to learn something before they learn it. Most kids get one chance. Now, part of the problem, your country and mine, is we have so much of the curriculum, we rush through it. If we had half the curriculum, we could actually do this much more effectively. Learning it over time, using mnemonics, that helps. Distributed practice, the notion of retrieval practice, doing assessments so that you have multiple opportunities to bring up ideas and to consolidate. The notion of deliberate practice, that's not practice. I don't know about you, but I do a lot of practice and learn the wrong stuff. I want deliberate practice, and that is practice with feedback. And it's hard work, but there's Practice, 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 over-spaced, over time, really makes the difference. And I think we need to be a lot more systematic at teaching those strategies to help kids move from that massive content so they overlearn the critical parts so that they can then use it. I've spent about 40 years of my life coaching in a sport, cricket. Robin Williams described cricket beautifully for an American audience once when he said it was baseball on Valium. So imagine, I don't know the technicalities in baseball, but I want to teach the square cut. There's 4 things: where the ball lands, where your hands are, how you roll them over, where you finish. I want my kids to overlearn that. So in the game, they don't think. In the game, when the ball lands in a position, automatically they do a square cut. I want that in classrooms too. There are things that we have to overlearn. So that's the next phase. Now, we go to the deeper phase where we want students to make connections, we want them to build relationships, we want them to do reasoning and problem solving. And this is where all this self-regulation comes in, about knowing when to apply strategies, knowing when they're working. This is where planning comes in. Not at the earlier stage. Teachers, that's your job. This stage, we want students to be more involved in going into that learning pit and working it out. And to consolidate it, this is the most fascinating phase. This is when I want to hear students thinking aloud. Not at the first stage. It has a 0 to negative impact. But at this stage, self-consequences. How did you go about doing that? Self-questioning. Doing it in groups. Constructing occasions where kids can actually think aloud. Because every single kid in America who's sitting in a classroom, they want to know, how did John do that? Here's the problem, John. We don't have a very good language of learning. John gets the answer correct. We ask him how he does it, and he says, oh, I did this and this and this. But if I'm a brain surgeon and I opened up your brain, John, I would find a butterfly in there. And what you do is you flit over here and realize it's not going to give you the right answer. So you flit back and you go over here, and you're very good at error management to get the right answer. And you get it, usually within a millisecond. And everyone says, wow, he's smart. How did he do it? And what you tell me is you tell me how you went from there to the right answer, and you edit out all the editing. It's the editing that makes you smart. It's knowing when you make errors and how to fix them. That's why I'm so passionate about helping kids hear learning. I want teachers to think aloud. I want teachers to talk about the errors they make. All the kids are making those errors, and they want to know what to do. So you can see why this phase is the most exciting phase in classrooms. I want to hear that thinking. It has to be high trust, because some kids have very poor thinking strategies. I can assure you, John, on many, many times during an E1 day, I have incredibly poor thinking strategies, and I don't want to expose them. Therefore, I'm not a learner. We have to expose those thinking. So this is why teaching the strategies of learning, building up a theory of learning, having kids have a narrative of learning. The hard part is knowing when to use the right strategy. And my argument's simple. Tell the students, today we're going to talk about this precious knowledge. I want you to know this stuff, and we're going to overlearn it. Tomorrow, we're now going to use the stuff you learned in a problem. And the icing on the cake is when you convince the students that you really mean this by having 2 assessment points. One assessment is about the content, one is about the deep. The minute you put them together, students are smart. They say, he just cares about the content. And here's the conspiracy. Kids above average prefer content, because that's the game they're winners at. They know how to overlearn, because that's the games they're winner at. They don't want all that problem stuff. They don't want that thinking aloud. That's just too hard. They want that. So there's a whole conspiracy that reinforces facts, facts, facts. My argument is separate them out, but please teach those strategies of learning.
I love that. So if I'm hearing you right, John, it's organization, consolidation of one's learning, and then exposing our thinking. Thinking about
Spot
our
on.
thinking, that metacognition, and doing it.
Anyway, I don't care how you do it. Visually, verbally, kinesthetically. I want to put a little condition in here, because sometimes when I do this, people hear what we're saying and say, there's an order. No, you can start the other way around. You can start with a problem to listen how they're thinking, to work out what they know and don't know, so you go and teach that.
I love that you just said that, and I'll tell you why, John. In an earlier episode, we had as guest Peter Lilladal talk
Yeah.
about math practices, shifting the practice that we do a lot here in this country. The I do, we do, you do. I'll do the problem first. We'll do one together, and then you'll have practice to think about how to do the problem. Where
Yeah.
he was suggesting you flip it. To your point, all right, guys, this is your problem. Think about how you're going to solve it. Yes, I know I haven't taught you anything yet. That's okay. The goal is thinking. I want to hear, I want to observe the thinking. I'm not necessarily looking for the right answer right now. I'm looking at the thinking because then you hook your students. Because now, to your point before, when you said that students want to know how the other students got things, now they're curious. Now they're vested. Because if we do it the other way, like we've traditionally been doing it, where it's I do the problem first, then we do it together. First of all, if there are students that have a better understanding, they're bored to tears already. And everyone else is checking out and losing interest before they even tackle the problem. Is that an example of what you're talking about?
I think Peter's work, Joe Bowler's work on that is just exemplary. Matt Kapoor's done this on productive difficulties. As you say, it's very appealing. One of the things that we've done over the years with a particular app we have is identify what is the dominant emotion in classrooms. And we have about 300,000 students that have used the app, and the dominant emotion in classrooms by a million miles is boredom. And why? Think about it. It's hard work to work out big ideas, summarizing notation. It's hard work to overlearn. And if you do all that and there's no payoff, you say to yourself after a while, why am I bothering? And so you do turn off. And so the point you're raising, and there's no right way to do it, but there's alternative ways to start with the content and move up to the problem, but start with the problem and work backwards. As you're hinting out there, I take the view that engagement and motivation follows learning. If you think you're going to learn something from this teacher, and you do, you're going to be motivated. There's no point me motivating you and then giving you a lousy job. And so that notion of, oh, in this class, we're actually going to hear how different students think. We're going to hear how the teacher thinks. It's okay to have wrong ways to do it and then go to the content. The backward design people for years have been saying this, and it doesn't work because so often what happens is teachers look at that deeper learning and then ask what knowledge and skills you need, and you don't need half as much as what we teach them. If I was your superintendent of education in America, the first thing I'd do is halve the amount of stuff in the curriculum so that we can actually focus on what Peter's talking about and Joe's talking about, the reasoning, the way of thinking mathematically. Very, very powerful.
So then, in terms of these learning strategies, these approaches, you talked about a lot of ways we should be teaching that we're not really maximizing yet. What do you think, or how do you think we could teach differently in the future? What is it going to take to shift these practices? Because in my coaching, I will still have folks that tell me I'm a visual learner, or I'm a kinesthetic learner. So old practices die hard.
Oh, yeah.
If we are going to get folks shifting their thinking as teachers and focusing on those core learning strategies that have been shown to lead to student growth and achievement, organization, consolidation, exposed thinking, how do we make that shift?
This is the quandary, and we've been spending a lot of time. In fact, I'm very proud of this book we wrote on this because I wrote it with my son. Great Learners by Design. And in that, we say, well, one place to start is by asking a school, not a teacher, a school, maybe even a system. We've done it at systems level. Do it at a whole country level. What is it, the desirable ways of being a learner in the school? If you ask students about great teaching, they couldn't care less about how you teach. They absolutely care about being a learner. So one of the things that we do, for example, is we form a group, usually of the willing, and we say, let's work out amongst ourselves, what are the desirable aspects of being a learner in the school? Now, we have a rule, can't be more than 7. Gets too big. And it's a very rich conversation. When teachers get going, they say, we want kids to be resilient, we want them to have creativity, we want them to be problem solving, you name it. I've worked with hundreds of schools doing this. I don't care, as long as you've got the 7 that you decide. Step 1, Step two, now let's go and interview our students across the grades. What does it mean to be a good learner in this classroom? Or in high school, you might want to say, tell me about the best learner in this classroom and why they're a good learner. Almost 100% of kids say the same thing. A good learner is someone who comes well prepared, listens and watches the teacher work. Compliance. Now, that's the first thing. When you put those up on the whiteboard in the staff room and you look at your list and you look at the students' list, realizing you have a problem is the first step. If you ask teachers, oh, you have a theory of learning? Yeah, they'll talk about it. But when you hear those students in the same class of the teachers who want all this lovely resilience and collaborative problem solving, hear their students say, no, it's about compliance. That's step one. Step two, students. Then you say, okay, we're going to adopt this model. Then comes the hard part. Can we actually include the teaching of some of those strategies as part of our lesson? And quite frankly, John, we get the comment was, yes, about a minute a month at best. It's just not good enough. And so that's where the leadership of the school, and we have things like learning detectives. Today, Mary, you're going to be the learning detective, Mary and Ethan, and your job is to tell us at the end of the day when you saw learning happening, where you heard it happen. And they struggle for the first few days. So then the other kids and the teachers start to support the learning detectives. So you're starting this. And we've got a lot of these strategies we talk about is how we can develop a language of learning. The kids absolutely want to be problem solvers, resilient, creative, and all those things. But they're terrified because they know that the proper answer is to be compliant. And that's where teachers and leadership. So there is a lot of strategies we can use to build a notion of learning. What does it mean to be a good learner? It's not just having that flash website that these are the 7 things we do. That's a really good starting point. To be frank, the majority of schools don't even do that. So I want a language of learning. I want to start building that up. I want to say every time we do a lesson, and we do a lesson plan, we're going to talk about what we want the kids to know, how they're going to do it, what activities they're going to use, and we also want to know what is the optimal learning strategies we should be teaching as you do that, and building it in to the lesson design. And then you can start to see this happening.
Have you worked with any schools or school systems that have made this shift and done this shift well?
Oh, yes. That's part of the reason that I keep going on this, John. I see so much excellence. I travel a lot. I see many schools doing this. And in fact, I'm doing some work at the moment in preparation for a talk I'm giving in July with this very strange notion. Why don't we talk about excellence? We have so many excellent schools. And I've got data, and I've picked out 41 of them that I'm using at the moment. And it's a miracle to see what's happening in those schools. It's hard work, it's passionate, but they're talking about learning every day. They have these concepts of learning. You can see it when the students are talking. We listen to what the students are saying is about their learning, and it's a very rich conversation. It's okay to talk about, I did not know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. For many kids, that's terrifying, particularly amongst their friends when they say they don't know how to do it. So yeah, I think there's many cases of this happening. It's just not enough.
So now we've talked about a lot, John, in terms of what schools get wrong with the research, what the research says actually works in terms of students becoming learners and learning well. And we've talked about some learning strategies that specifically educators can be using with students to create these learners that we want them to be. We've also talked about and gone over some examples of how schools can do that. What have we not talked about that you want the listeners of this podcast to know when it comes to effective learning strategies?
Well, one of the things that we certainly have learned over the last 25 years in your country and mine is that assessment drives a lot of what we do in school. And I think it's fascinating to note that if I ask any teacher in the world to create an achievement test, they can do it in buckets and spades. It's not difficult. We have hundreds, thousands, millions of achievement tests. John, how many measures of learning have we got? One of the things we did as a team is we developed, and it's a self-report, so it's not as good as it should be, a self-report measure of those top 12 or 14 strategies. We have a family foundation, so we put it on the family foundation website. It's free. Any teacher can go in, any class can go in, they can do this, and it will give you a report about how well you are on these strategies. But more critically, you can then click a button to say, I want to know more about space practice. I want to know more about deliberate practice. I want to know more about self-consequences. And it gives you all those resources. And I encourage people to use it. And when you use it, we get no names, no schools identified in it. It comes back to you because it helps create a discussion amongst your students and amongst your teachers about how well we're doing it, the optimal learning strategies. Go to the Hattie Family Foundation website. But my point is more general. I think we need to be better at measuring it as part of what we do. I think principals, school leaders, when they do their walkthroughs, a simple walkthrough, count the student questions. Teachers ask between 150 to 200 questions a day that require less than 3-word answers. How many questions does a class ask about their work they don't know the answer to? So I'm ruling out procedural questions. Can I go to the toilet? What page am I on? 2 a day. Count the student questions. And that's a really powerful way of starting. That's a really good measurement way to say, are students thinking? Are students going through the processes of being engaged in what's happening in this classroom? Little sub-hobby at the moment, looking at artificial intelligence. To use AI, you have to be very good at asking questions. We don't teach kids to ask questions. Every kid knows questions are asked by the teacher. And they also know that every question the teacher asks, the teacher already knows the answer to. That is not good modeling. I want more open-ended questions. I want to hear more kids' questions. That's another way of looking at the measurement of what we're talking about. And I think we've got to play the game. And the game is assess what we assess matters, for good or bad. I want learning to be part of that assessment.
John, where can people find out more about you? You already talked a little bit about the Family Foundation website. In addition to the family website, where can people, like I said, find out more about you if they want to reach out to you? How can they find you?
I do it all through the Corwin site, and that's a lot of free stuff on there. So again, I'm not selling anything. If you go to the Corwin publishing site and look at visible learning, there's a whole lot of resources there. We have a free Facebook site that Corwin run about visible learning. The one thing I will mention, which is the commercial part, is the book we wrote with my son and 2 others on Great Learners by Design. That's where we bring all this together, talk about the strategies, talk about how we build a learning community, how do we build schools as learning organizations. And as you can probably hear, John, that's my passion.
It is, and it's a worthy passion and an important one because we haven't figured it all out yet. Because if we had figured it out, our students wouldn't be having the deficits in learning that they still have.
Ironic in a way that I did spend a lot of time trying to think of the name for all this. And I came up with the name visible learning, which sometimes gets misunderstood and people call it visual learning as if it's a learning style. But the reason I call that is not because learning is visible, but because I want to make learning visible.
John, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very interesting conversation. We talked about a lot of great strategies. I hope people will listen to the podcast over and over again and pick different nuggets from it at different times, because I think it can really improve our professional practices as educators. And like I said before, like we keep talking about, there's still work to be done there, but it's doable. Because as you mentioned, there are a lot of good schools out there doing good work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.